everyone to another episode of Mondays with Miami Freedom Project. I'm Ana Sofia Pelais, the co-founder, executive director of Miami Freedom Project. And we're a year-round civic engagement organization. What we're doing almost frantically in this next couple of weeks is civic engaging our little hearts out around the election. So please go to Miami Freedom Project on Instagram. Make sure you're joining our Mobilize link. We have a ton of really amazing events to just make sure that we're talking to everyone, doing everything we can so that everyone turns out for this election. So that's my pitch. And now I want to welcome our guest, Liz Alarcón from Pulso. Thank you for being here with me today, Liz.
I feel in confianza here in this space, Ana Sofia. So happy to be here chatting about the city we love.
Yeah. Thank you. So Liz, I love, we have known each other for a very long time. We've worked together. We've been friends for a while. But I'm going to ask you questions as though I didn't know. And I feel free to surprise me or not. But I would love to know from your perspective. So can you describe a little bit about you're founder of a really incredible media organization, Pulso. Can you tell us a little bit about what Pulso does and how it came into being?
Yes, I can't believe we're at year 6, lucky number 6 now. I founded Pulso in 2018 with the help of a media incubator, Accelerate Change, who at that point was looking to invest in media entrepreneurs that could speak to the audiences that mainstream media has been ignoring. So parents through Parents Together, if you've heard of that outlet, or Black folks through Push Black, another amazing outlet in the network, partnering with folks like Feminist and Impact. But there was a gap in reaching Latinos, especially in English. And so in 2018, Ana Sofia, they hired me as an entrepreneur in residence. I was a solopreneur trying to figure out what we could do to communicate to our community. And I did a lot of community outreach and customer discovery, as we say, to found Pulso, the name that our audience chose way back when. And what we do is create content on 6 different platforms. So you can find us on Instagram, Facebook Messenger. We have a newsletter. We're on TikTok, of course, starting to get into YouTube. And we have a podcast, In Confianza, where we share history no one taught us in school, culture, content to keep the pulso a nuestra gente, and of course commentary that we hope that you won't find anywhere else. And my minute-and-a-half monologue will end with the other work that we do that is also crucial to the why of Pulso, which is not just to reach our community with content that no one else is creating, but digital organizing. And that civic engagement work that you talked about at the top here is crucial to our mission. And so every election cycle, through where people are spending their time on their phone, we register voters, we help voters request a vote by mail ballot, we help them make a plan to vote, we help them take the census and take action on other issues they care about.
It's incredible work, and you've named so many things. So you talked about doing audience research. How would you describe the Pulso audience?
Well, over the last 6 years, it has evolved. We started with a bit of an older audience, especially if you think of Facebook Messenger, which is where we started. It was Gen X and Boomers, and we've really done efforts in the last 2 years especially to reach millennials and Gen Z folks. And that really is our target audience nationally. So that's important to mention that Pulso reaches Latinos anywhere they are. And we're interested in those states where Latinos are a growing population, much like electoral candidates are interested in those states for reaching Latinos as well. But I would tell you that our ideal audience are English dominant Gen Z millennials that feel like they want to reconnect with their Latino roots and be civically engaged.
So I'm sure you've probably had to say this many times, and you've heard it many times. The kind of disclaimer we always have to give when we have to say I'm Cuban American, you're Venezuelan American. Latinos are not a monolith.
Love that phrase. It's our favorite phrase.
It's our favorite phrase. It's almost like you feel like it's your kind of like legal disclaimer at the beginning of every statement. But I do feel there is, and this I'm only speaking from my own personal perspective, there is an identification with a larger Latino identity, which, if I'm in a group of Latinos, yes, I'm Cuban. I'm the Cuban in the group. If I'm in a group with people who are anything else, I'm Latina, and I don't see a contradiction in that. I think it's something that I'm very, I love both of those spaces, and I love being a part of both of those spaces. What I think Pulso has done so well for me, and as someone who receives those messages and is always following you, what you're doing on social media, is that it does feel like it hits both. It speaks to a larger Latino history that resonates with me and that I identify with and I empathize with, and then I get some very specific information about like, oh my God, I didn't know that. And it could be about Cuban history, it could be a Colombian, it could be like so many different parts of the Mexican, everything you want. It names so many moments in history, like you said, that we weren't taught in school. Like, how do you manage those two spaces of being both so specific and so granular, but also speaking to like a larger identity and sense of place and community?
It is a painstaking work of trial and error on Ana Sofia that honestly we've failed out a lot of things that haven't worked. I probably have more examples of narratives and storylines and phrases that we actually have found haven't worked well that have led us to things that do work. And so I think the first thing I would say is that with anything digital, you really have to throw tons of things up on the proverbial wall to see what's resonating. And for us, the last 6 years has been a journey in that. I will say that it has evolved with our audience. So I think the first 3 years of Pulso was a different time. And anytime we had the word Latino in the comment, in the phrase, in the cover, in the story, it would work so much better than if we hyper specified Colombian or Bolivian or Cuban. Now it's shifted. If you go to our Instagram now, it doesn't say Latino anywhere. It doesn't say Latino in our tagline. It doesn't say Latino in most of our content because the way in which people have been sharing that they prefer to identify is precisely by country of origin, is precisely with their specific moniker, whether it's Chicano or Boricua. And so how we've adapted to what the data has been telling us to do both, like you mentioned, is first our slate of creators, which we have 7 creators that work with us now that you'll see their faces if you look at our content on Instagram, to lead with their hyper specific personal experience. And so I always say to the team, the specific is universal. By you sharing those quirks or that specific anecdote of your Dominican upbringing, a Cuban will say, oh my God, me too. A Venezuelan will say, oh my gosh, me too. An Ecuadorian might say, oh my gosh, me too, which you all do quite often with your Cuban American focus and the work that you do at Miami Freedom Project. And so we are starting to do a lot more of that. But then when we're celebrating those facts, like you mentioned, that people didn't know about Extraordinary Latinos, which is one of our franchises, or another moment in history or a law that may have affected Mexican Americans primarily because of the area of the country that they were in, then we go in and say, hey, thanks to that, we're all here and can benefit from the much progress that has been made, and that does have a universal experience as well. And so honestly, it's been a lot of failing to not get it right that has gotten us to a place where now we're getting more things right than wrong, which I probably couldn't tell you that 3 years ago.
No, I mean, I think it's so essential that you're doing this work because I feel like when we talk about Latino media, I don't think people realize how few properties there are that are Latino owned, Latino founded. Very important figures in journalism, very important figures in front of the camera and storytelling and executive and in any kind of area. But that sense of ownership, agency, and authorship of how people who are doing that work of saying like, okay, how do we really speak to each other? How do we understand each other? And that it's coming from within and not just checking a box from the outside of like, okay, we did Hispanic Heritage Month, let's move on. I don't think people realize that there aren't that many.
There aren't.
It doesn't exist.
There aren't that many. And, our team, we're fully remote. We're across the entire U.S. I'm the only one here in Florida. And I have a very particular personal experience. I'm a Venezuelan American in Miami. My COO is a Salvadoran American in DC. My head of content is a Colombian American who lives in Puerto Rico. My head of outreach is a Mexican Salvadoran who lives in LA. So that, Ana Sofia, I think to the point of bringing your personal experience is very different than if we were at a white-owned media outlet with a couple of Latinos trying to speak to everyone about our community. It's we are speaking to us, about us, by us in a way where I don't have to explain why we celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month. A lot of the content that you'll see, for example, September 15th or October 15th is this is the reason why. I don't need to tell that to my audience. We're all Latino. We all like that is Latino 101 and we're at Latino 2.0, right? Trying to go deeper. And so I think that's the difference that you'll see with some of the content of other outlets who are trying to reach us. It's like kind of explaining us to other people, but also to us in a way where it's not culturally competent, that other phrase that we say, because there are some things that are given that are, you know, the implicit is explicit. We get it. We know. Let's just go deeper. And so for our History Month, which is what we call it at Pulso, we tried to give care packages digitally to folks who want to connect more to their roots, or, you know, celebrate stories in a different way. Try to be more, again, go deeper and really speak to a yearning that we are trying to fulfill for those in the hyphen, as they say, you know, more cliches, or in between, or who are bicultural, or who want that content, that speaks to the many facets of their identity.
I think it's fascinating everything you're saying, and there's two things I want to ask you about. So you are telling these, you're a story maker, you're driving a narrative, but you're also taking that next step to really identify calls to action, ways that people can. Why was that so important to not separate that, to not take that very passive voice of just straight reporting or just straight journalism, but really identify that this is a community that you're an audience that you've identified, that you're engaging with, that you're communicating, but you also want them to take an action. Why was it so important to have that civic engagement piece be part of your work from the beginning?
Because Latinos are not participating at the rates that we should, Ana Sofia. You know, all the stats that, I don't know how many of you all may be familiar with this, but in our world, we're nearly 20% of the population, a stat that's ringing in my head often. We have more than 33 million of us eligible to vote, and nearly half of those eligible are not participating. So there's a problem that we want to solve, that the power in numbers that we already have is not representative yet in the power in our actions. And so when we think of our theory of change, more wonky language here as to just really translate into our reason for being, we believe that the year-long narrative making that we do with our history, culture, commentary, even personal anecdotes that you'll see on Pulso, and as we explore new ways to reach an audience, we hope that reminds you of the power you already have. We don't need to empower you, just remind you that you have power in numbers, to then lead you to exercise that power, because there can be a sense of powerlessness. There can be a sense of my vote doesn't actually impact anything, or, you know, other reasons why we're not seeing the participation that we should be seeing within our community. And so for us, it was important to, through the narrative building, include that call to action, because we're not participating yet how we should be in terms of that power in numbers. And so that's why for us, like I was mentioning at the beginning at Pulso, it's important to, again, straight from our phones where everyone is spending their time, help folks take all those civic actions. But even if you go on our Instagram now, you'll see a partnership with Vote 411, which gives nonpartisan resources for people who are voting. And so we partner with folks to amplify their message, or with Make the Road Nevada. You'll see a partnership with them where our influencers, our creators are creating content to elevate local things that are happening. We've done events with Miami Freedom Project here locally, to share those narratives. So we're starting to do more of that, because we see it as our duty to, where we can, amplify the work being done by amazing partners in state, and also, you know, again, helping people exercise the power we already have.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so important. I also don't think people realize, and I think for us, we're also, for Miami Freedom Project, it's almost like the reverse. We start with the engagement, and then we try to bring in the culture. And I think it's wonderful to start with the culture and then bring in the engagement, because it's both. And I think it's really about identifying a community that is defining itself and redefining itself constantly. I think whenever anybody talks about, the Cuban American, the Venezuelan American, it's like it's in stages. And for somebody who got here yesterday, reset. You're starting over. You're starting very early in a process in very different circumstances, but then part of a larger community that's been defined by that experience. So to the extent that we can bring people in, I think it has to be responsive in a way that you're doing. And I don't think people realize that when we talk about a Latino vote, when we talk about the power of a Cuban vote, a Venezuelan vote, a Colombian, it's also very difficult to identify because we're not easily identified. We're at the intersection of race, ethnicity. There's so many different ways that we identify in our own kinds of country of origins, our own experiences, that when you pull up a voter file, find me the Latinos, like it's hard to, you almost have to create a Venn diagram of
Right, where they live, and because they're enclaves, so that Colombians are heavily concentrated in Kendall, and Venezuelans are heavily concentrated in Doral, and that Cubans are heavily concentrated in Hialeah, but I don't live in any of those places, so they're...
Or then social media, it's another,
Right.
when you're trying to think about who your audience is, you're like, I can tell you that they're 25, they live in Doral,
Oh my gosh,
and they
exactly.
like Bad Bunny. And you're like, that doesn't really tell you, because everybody has that Americana buena gente. It's just like more Latina than you could ever hope to be. And
Exactly.
like, this means something, but not really anything that we can't really kind of see it through. So I think having an organization like Pulso that's doing this work, the identification with your organization is helping all of us see ourselves, because we can really see. You could say if somebody registers to Pulso, it's more, you can concretize that person is identifying with Pulso as a Latino coming from that experience.
That's exactly right, Ana Sofia. And we do a bunch of what they call in my wonky world typology surveys to verify that this profile that you're mentioning actually matches the ideal person we're trying to reach. And that's a very after the fact. But you're right that our hope is, if I'm hyper specifically talking about I don't know. I'm trying to think of a Monday prompt that we just had. Maná distancing themselves from Nicky Jam, and like, what does our audience think of that after a political endorsement, and like either side of the aisle weighing in? Who are those two artists, Maná and Nicky Jam? I highly doubt that someone who doesn't already listen to those artists, which we assume would be a Latino person, would be engaging and commenting what they think of that piece of content, So that's exactly right. That hyper-specific post that we did is already filtering the kind of audience that we want to reach out to. I highly doubt, again, a non-Latino from Michigan will be commenting on what do you think about what happened between Maná and Nicky Jam.
And there's the intergenerational piece that you've already identified.
Yes.
Because to me, Maná is like, it's Maná.
Right.
You do what they say.
Exactly.
Like, that's but Nicky Jam is going to speak to a completely different part of the audience.
And people have been lifelong fans of these folks. So we hope that it brings in the nostalgia. It brings in that passion of those diehard fans. So, again, the very premise of prompting our audience to weigh in on something like that is something that I don't see in other places where it might be reported that this happened, but like, no, what do you think about this? Yeah,
because you're right. I do think a lot of other parts of the country might just be like,
is that even a thing? Who are these people? Or why does that matter? And for us, it's like, what do you mean? Why does that matter? These are icons for our community in an intergenerational way as well. So, yeah.
I mean, I do appreciate that you're doing this work, because I think even like when we have that conversation of what the values of our community are, there's potential, there's shifting, and I think that idea that we're all going to hold together in this kind of like a Latino identity that is going to supersede any thoughts you might have on the economy, on immigration, on education, on gun safety, on women's rights, that's going to be an imperative that's going to just kind of put everything else on mute. I just think isn't going to happen. We're all dealing with these complexities, but we're not a community that is identified or known for, or the complexities of this community aren't understood. and they aren't engaged with. I think there's this sense of like, this is what Latinos want to hear. And it's it's rarely what Latinos are thinking about, which is, again, it's so wonderful that you're speaking directly to us in a way that isn't happening before, and why it's so important that we do have Latino founded organizations doing this work. Because in some ways it can be, I'm sure it's hard to have those conversations when you're doing your fundraising and your outreach, and you're always kind of very, making sure that you're present in a lot of spaces. But I find that sometimes when you talk about Latinos, it's like you're waking up a sleepwalker. Like they just have this sense of, and then you're just kind of like, okay, I've got to tell this person the truth, and it's going to make them uncomfortable in so many ways. And you have this like empathy, but then at the same time, you're like, no, you got to wake up.
Yeah, and you are right. I just mentioned that I didn't think that my media making would involve convincing millionaires that Latinos matter, which is in fact a lot of the work that I do in the founder space, which is, and it's interesting because I'm happy to go back to this framing that I use often of Latino 101 and Latino 2.0. I do spend a lot of my time in that Latino 101 space, educating non-Latinos about who we are, convincing them to invest in Pulso and just in our work generally. And a lot of folks are nervous about making sure that non-Latinos know that we are nuanced, or worried about complicating the narrative about us because we're so hard to understand. And I think that we just have to lean into it. And I know you do this as well. And those of us who find ourselves rallying the support of others for our community have just realized that we are who we are. I think probably 6 years ago at Sofia, I would have tried to make us seem nicer and neater. And now it's like, you know what? South Florida is South Florida. The Rio Grande Valley is a Rio Grande Valley. Michigan and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin each have different Latino communities there. And yes, you are going to need to speak differently to folks who are there versus in Texas, and do the work, because if not, you're going to see the repercussions of it. So
and I think it's a sign of success as well that we're making those demands. I think how the Cuban vote is discussed and how Cuban Americans are discussed, and at the same time, I do appreciate that we've always made ourselves persuadable. We've always made ourselves a vote that you have to work for.
That's right.
It hasn't always had the outcomes that I would want, just for my own personal beliefs and values and what I would like to see happen. But I also appreciate that it did bring resources to our community, to be demanding, hard to please.
Right.
You also don't want that to become a limitation in who is supported in our community and how we engage with other Latinos and how we engage with other Black, white, Caribbean, how we're part of a larger national picture. And I do think it's part of the process. So many of us are in different stages of when we've come to this country, what circumstances brought us, and what we're expecting and demanding of our own assimilation. Do we identify ourselves as being here temporarily? Once those goalposts move and you find yourself here in a semi-permanent basis, and then it becomes home.
Right.
That whole process that all of our communities are going through in different
and who's accompanying
times.
You in that process. Miami Freedom Project here locally, Pulso, we hope nationally. You need company, right? Like who are you going to? Sometimes it's people with the wrong intentions, outlets with the wrong intentions, folks of influence. Wrong intentions may be too strong, but perhaps a better way to say it is not with the best intention of that community understanding the system and then being able to make decisions for themselves in mind.
And I would say this, another thing that I think and I would love to talk to you about is how you've expanded, because I think when you talk about digital organizing, it aligns with who I'm seeing in front of me, with your own experience as a millennial. But I do think it can feel very limiting if you're not meeting people where they are. And you're actually on the radio now. Can you talk to me a little about the new program you're on?
Yes, De Radio a Radio. And I've been hinting at it with my intergenerational nods here since we began our conversation, Ana Sofia. This new journey on the radio is very special to me. It's very close to my heart. Every Friday at noon, so close to the time here, same as the space here Miami Community Radio. I am on La 1140 AM, La WQBA, a historic AM radio station here in South Florida, on an intergenerational show, a concept I invented called La Millennial y el Milenario. Pedro Sevsek, who's my co-host, just Miami treasure really in the media, invented the name. And so it's very co-hosted here, me with the concept, him with the name. And the point of our show is to quite literally have conversations, not debates, which I do often in other spaces, but it's to engage intergenerationally on the values, something that you've mentioned throughout our conversation today, that make us who we are as South Floridians. And so me as a millennial and Pedro as a boomer, how are we talking about everything from healthcare to the loneliness epidemic, to entrepreneurship and how we view the workplace, which was our topic 2 weeks ago, to the First Amendment, which is going to be our topic this Friday, and how we're viewing free speech versus hate speech now from an intergenerational space as media folks, who we both are, him and I. And bringing in guests that can give us a sociological, psychological, economic perspective to kind of track trends over time. I don't think enough people are doing this. We hope that it's a new concept. We're lighthearted, echamos broma, it's in Spanish, and it's really close to my heart for 2 reasons. One, my mom had a show on the station 20 years ago.
I didn't know that.
Yes.
I knew she was a journalist. I didn't know she had a show.
She had a show on that same radio station 20 years ago. It was called Good Morning Miami with Agustina Costa, who has very much changed his ways in terms of how he is serving our community now. So I find it serendipitous, and it's just a true honor to very literally walk in my mom's footsteps, to step into that radio station and still see the same general manager from when my mom was there 20 years ago. Incredible. And still see staff who worked with her there. I never would have thought that this would be an opportunity for me. So on that end, you can imagine you all how touched I am, and what big shoes I have to fill, honoring my mom's legacy in that way. But secondly, because as you know so well, we are bombarded with mis and disinformation in especially Spanish language radio in South Florida. And so to be able to wear many hats, as you do as well, but I'm always consistently dancing between my national hat and my local hat, my Venezuelan hat, and where am I of most service. I truly see this role as a place where I can combat the harm that has been inflicted on our community with the mis and disinformation that we hear on the airwaves. And so not just our show on Fridays at noon, but if you look at the cast of La 1140 AM, you have Neida Sandoval, trusted journalist. You have Oscar Asa, another trusted voice. Julio Cesar Camacho, another very trusted Venezuelan journalist, and of course Pedro Sevsek and others who are on the station, who you will find the truth from them and hear it from them. So that was a very long monologue to tell you all about this project, but it's very close to my heart.
I think it's wonderful, and I love that you named that this was your mom's, a legacy of your mother, because I do think she was part of a generation of journalism
very
that
different.
Our community
Yes.
so desperately needs and starved for. And I think they held a standard of how they engaged and how they educated members of their larger community who were in an early experience of coming here, and the responsibility that they were standard bearers in a way that really helped us understand ourselves in South Florida specifically, because I do think our media market we have a very important media market in the larger Latino national community.
100%, Ana Sofia. Anything that happens in South Florida, not just because the billboards and the Latin Grammys and because those big events happen here, but you're absolutely right that we have la sucursal, as they say in Spanish, of Hispanic media for the region and for the country, with their eyes here or with their headquarters here, whether it's Telemundo, Univision, BBC in Spanish. We have the I think it's in the Freedom Tower where the Latin American hub is, and where you have all this media spokespeople speak for the region from here. So it's such an important place, and it's been unfortunately hijacked by, again, folks who don't have the best interest necessarily of our community, that are, or who are spreading mis and disinformation, and on an extreme end of the spectrum, quite literally telling our community lies.
I mean, it's an editorial standard that has to be enforced. And I think it's really important that you're in a space, because I do think if we're having that conversation in the digital space, or if it's on YouTube, which we're on now, or we're having that conversation in the radio, and we're having different, if you're not at that point of intersection, you're not necessarily resolving anything. You're not working through any kind of dissonance.
Right.
And then that allows the disinformation to just almost operate in a vacuum. And I think, if you're having a conversation about Amendment 1, I think the way that we talk about that in social media is relevant. And I think you don't want, we're obviously, you're somebody who's in your life, in your family, it's freedom of speech is vital, and it's important. And you want to be able to defend that without it having be these bad actors who are spreading disinformation. You do that by having it embedded in the third estate, in practitioners who are enforcing that, and having those conversations that are difficult on all platforms.
And that's exactly right, Ana Sofia. You were just saying it. Look, I think right now a lot is talked about traditional media is dying, and that's not where you reach people. I'm the first evangelist for digital. That's literally been my work. I am also the first evangelist for Latino Speak English. Anytime you see me on tour nationally, anywhere, I'm like, we speak English. Hi, I'm speaking to you in English. And here I am now on radio in Spanish.
Yeah.
So that's to say that all things can be true. And yes, and is one of my favorite phrases. Not just the English and Spanish and traditional and digital, but probably the smartest strategy is to be in all of the places capacity allowing, right? This conversation here will be on YouTube, but there will be a link on social for people to go to YouTube, and then our families can watch on WhatsApp, and people are listening on the radio. And so the multimedia approach, which is to say, yes, we reached Spanish dominant boomers on Fridays at noon en la Millennial El Milenario que están escuchando en su casa, but then you go to La 1140 WQAM on Instagram and you'll see a behind the scenes, and so then you'll see the face to the show, and then we'll have clips from the show. I mean, all of this is in the works as any newly relaunched station, so props to Latino Media Network too for relaunching this 2 months ago. So it's a process, but you know it as well. It's not enough to just do the 30-second video. It's not enough to be in person. It's every space as much as possible so that it reaches everyone where they are.
And I do think these spaces need to renew themselves, because I think, when I think about WQA or, any other Latino station, it was always like, was playing in the radio in my grandparents' kitchen constantly. But I miss that. And I think the sense of that you're not going to have the next generation engage. I think we're in that I think, and this is speaking from my experience, for Latinos, we have almost like a permission structure that can be very limiting. So it's almost like, oh no, that's their space because your Spanish is not as fluent or as like it doesn't flow in the same way. You're not Spanish language dominant. So you feel like I can't have this conversation with someone who's a millennial or someone who's, boomer, or someone who's, kind of embodies that space. And then we're just going to see this drop off, and we're going to see further fragmentation. We're going to see further disconnection. And I always value that if there's a debate, you're going to be giving commentary on Univision, on Telemundo, that I am going to see someone who is
more someone who you might identify with, right?
Who's of a who's of a different generation.
Yes, and
that
that's why
can
I
have
do
that
it.
perspective, and it's invaluable that you're willing to take that step, because so many people who are at that kind of professional stage of being able to speak with confidence and have a background and really understand fully what the position they're presenting will kind of take that step away from being in that hyphenated space of like, no, that's for my parents, my grandparents, an older kind of demographic and space.
And it's important for older folks who are accustomed to seeing only people like them to hear the perspective of younger folks, as it is for ourselves to see ourselves in those spaces. It's the intergenerational component, Ana Sofia, that you mentioned is so important. I'll share a funny anecdote and a relevant anecdote from our show en la 11:40 a couple of weeks ago. So I was talking about entrepreneurship and, you know, how different generations see the workplace. And I said, 3,000 trillones. Pedro Sepsek, you know, again, stickler and stellar journalist, was like, no se dice trillones, se dice 1,000 millones. So he's correcting my Spanish on air in the most jovial, fun way. And I'm like, see, Pedro, that's, you know, I'm telling him in Spanish, that's why, like, we need each other. And I was like, this is it. You know, I consider myself quite fluent, but there are going to be technicalities that I might not know. Should not make anyone ashamed from doing that, and we can do it again in a caring, loving, intergenerational way where we need each other to continue the work. And so I loved that happened in the same show where my guest, who I brought, actually has a lot of difficulty speaking Spanish. And I was so glad that she was brave enough to speak in Spanglish, speak how so many people do speak in Miami, so that if you turned on La 11:40 at 12:30 that day, you heard someone who sounds like most of Miami as well. Yeah. And so not just my own experience co-hosting, but to have guests on the show who we can translate in real time, and she was a Gen X, so she wasn't neither a millennial nor a boomer. Again, keeping with that intergenerational aspect. Everyone forgets us. Yes, no one will forget Gen X, folks.
I kind of love that.
You know, it was great. Like, it was great. It was great. And I was like, this is it. It was an organic conversation where you don't have to, like, you know, be extra polished or say it perfectly, because that's not what our community is like. Yeah. Y la radio, speaking of the medium, se presta para eso. So the medium itself, it's an hour-long conversation. It's not, again, the 30-second soundbite or the 2-minute hit that you do on TV where it's more important to be perfect. It's like, no, we're having a conversation.
It is interesting because I feel like the line keeps moving. Like, my mother I love her accent, and we'll tease her about her accent. If my mother corrects my Spanish, I die inside.
Yeah.
Even if she, like, and she's always, like, she corrects it's going to be in a loving way. It's always in a loving way.
But you feel some type of way about it.
You feel like, I failed my grandparents. They always wanted me to protect my Spanish. I took French instead. What was I thinking? It's a very it's a trigger.
It's a trigger for sure.
And yet, you know, there should be a kind of permission structure to use both. And if someone uses, and the reverse is never true. So if Sepsek, it was I've followed him. I've listened to him. I think he's always held a very high standard. If he uses an English word with the accent, I don't question it. I'm just like, okay, he just, you know, you don't think of him as speaking Spanglish, because he doesn't. He's very good. But at the same time, that's okay. Like, if you speak English with an accent when you go into Spanglish, it's permissible.
It's permissible.
The reverse is true, and you just feel like that, you know, awkward first-gen kid that didn't, you know, keep up.
Well, I'm so glad that you mentioned that. I'm looking at my phone, you all, not because I'm texting as a lot of young people do, but I wanted to pull up a piece of content from Pulso to share here, because it's exactly what you said about the line moving. So at the beginning of October, we shared this post that says, if you've ever been called a no sabo kid, this is for you. And it's a series of affirmations where it says, I'm a part of the community no matter what language I speak. My Spanglish is my own and it's beautiful. Making mistakes is part of my language journey. Only I determine how I connect with my culture. I'm connected to my heritage in many ways, not just through language. So, you know, this post got 102 comments and almost 800 shares because, Ana Sofia, the line is moving. Like, this might not have been the cool or appropriate thing to say 5 or 10 years ago, but now we're embracing that first-gen person who's struggling. We're embracing the person who habla castellano perfecto. We're embracing that person who, you know, is still learning from their grandparents. We're embracing all of us in a multi-generational way, in English and in Spanish, across mediums. Like, I have witnessed a change, even in the last 6 years since I've been doing that. And I just find it so powerful that we're naming that it's both emotional and okay, whether it's language or culture or political divide or whatever it is across our own families, because that is the Latino experience.
Yeah. And I think it's such an interesting, unique experience to us that it's hard to even have that mirror that reflects back to you, because we're in so many ways as immigrants a racialized community. So we're multiracial, multi-ethnic, like we've said. But if you can not speak Spanish, you can present as what we would identify as white, but still be identified or in some ways marginalized as a Latino, as an immigrant. And I think that can be a hard, or not feel, or if you're a Black Latino, not be identified as a Latino, but be identified, with one community, even though you hold both as part of your identity. Like, it's constantly, shifting for us. So I think to not have that point, to feel like you're losing any of your bearings, it matters. And it shouldn't be limited by whether or not you, fully were able to become bilingual or multilingual.
Absolutely.
And so I feel for those people who feel like, I'm having this experience and there's no outward marker that is part of it. And it's like, no, because it's random. They just kind of throw a filter on you.
Yeah, exactly.
And they say, I've decided you're Latino today. I've decided you're Black today. I've decided you're white today. And it's so random.
It is so random. And let's name the day.
Responsive to it.
Let's name the day, Ana Sofia. The term Latino was invented by the census like 60 years ago, probably, to categorize a community in ways that many people see themselves beyond, and the term Hispanic as well. And my point is that even when we think of the terms, and I don't want to break out a Latino versus Hispanic versus Latinx debate, but the point is, like, even when we think of the ways in which we're identified, a lot of those terms don't even come from us. So there has been a push again to reframe and to embrace those and make those terms our own. And it, of course, goes much beyond the terms, but it is an example of how often we kind of let the outside tell us what we can or should do with ourselves and our culture and our language and our identities.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so interesting because I think even like the Hispanic, Latino, Latinx, Latin, to me, it's not that I think however anybody wants to identify is equally valid. And I think we've kind of stepped away from stigmatizing how people choose to identify themselves. Sometimes I know that in our work, when you're citing a report, it's probably going to identify the Hispanics percentage. So you can't recast, you can't rewrite.
Right, a direct quote.
So you're like, we're Hispanic today. What can I tell you? And I do think, to me, it's not that I think those terms are neutral. And I think the work that's been done to unpack them and to really deconstruct what they mean and the potential harms are important. But I think in every time they've been re-identified, there was a good instinct, there was a good faith argument to be made for it, and there was valid criticisms against it. And they've come in waves. So I always kind of think of my mother. Like, for me I always think, okay, I would have to explain to my mother why she should be offended by this versus just accepting the fact that she is who she is, and she hasn't questioned it because she hasn't had this kind of litmus test in how she communicates, because she was born communicating via social media, which is always giving you a thumbs up or thumbs down on what you've said.
Right.
So
right, a judgment, always doing a judgment.
So I'm like, if I can't explain it to my mother, I'm not this is something that I should kind of take personally, or should take to heart, or I should feel harmed by. I can just see it as like part of a larger conversation that you can engage with as you will. Because if not, you're going to go, there's going to be another term tomorrow.
Exactly. And it's just going to pit us against each other, which is not the point. The point is precisely to make sure more of us feel included, whether you are of the LGBTQ plus community and Latino, whether you are Black and Latino, whether you are Indigenous and Latino. If more of us are not feeling connected to this broader project of unity, which is like a way I could frame Latinidad and solidarity. Exactly. If that's not happening, then it's not serving us. And who cares about them? But the us here is those of us with roots in Latin America. Like, that's the us that I am serving.
I understand that definition.
So there you go. If I'm serving that us, then I know that whether it's through Pulso or through La 1140 or through any other work I'm engaged in, then I'm doing right by us.
And it's hard. Just to go back to your voting, because I do remember the first time I voted in high school. And I was with, was it Lisette Alvarez? Hi, Lisette.
Hi,
You're
Liz.
watching. And we were in our, I think it was American AP, and we were filling out our forms, and I said, no, Lisa, we're other. Because they gave you white, black, and other.
Yes.
And she was
Other.
like, we're other. And she was like, we're not other. And I was like, well, we have to be, we don't have a choice, so let's go. And I remember the teacher calling us up and saying, which one of you is Asian? And of course, one of us could have been Latino and Asian. We just happened to not be.
Right.
But it's like, that was, I don't think they meant any kind of harm, but we were like, no, like we thought we'd done something wrong.
Yeah.
And I don't think we live in this kind of binary, we're in this conversation, but we represent so much more, and there's no right or wrong way to name that. It's all, I mean, there are some wrong ways to name it, but it's mostly, when it's with good faith, it should always be, adding to our understanding of ourselves.
100%.
Yeah.
We agree to agree.
We agree to agree.
Love it.
I love us. No, this has been, I think, one of the things I think is so important of your work. So because you do national work, and the station that you're with is very local.
Mm-hmm.
And we do have a section that we want to move into, because we're trying to capture everybody's feelings about Miami specifically.
Love it.
Because, I mean, I can tell you that one of the reasons we did Miami Freedom Project, it was co-founded by Cuban Americans, as you know, and I think that's always a community that I think we feel very uniquely. We have insight into how we want to communicate and where you could get to culturally competent, but we also felt that there was a broader Miamian audience that was in that first generation of, I'm Cuban American, I'm Haitian American, I'm Venezuelan American, I'm Nicaraguan American. We never wanted anyone to feel that there wasn't a kind of Miami,
a space for them too.
Yeah, that transcended.
Yeah.
And I do think Miami also has a kind of outsized relationship to the national Latino conversation, very specifically as a city that's identified as
Latino majority.
a Latino majority. I mean, I always say like majority foreign born, but I think it's probably majority Latino foreign born.
Yeah, you're right. It probably is that Venn diagram between foreign born in Latin America majority.
Yeah, and then if you think about with the Caribbean, you're like,
right,
well, you're kind of like cousins.
Right,
so
exactly.
Like,
and
Haitians
are Latinos.
Family.
Haitians are Latinos, so there you go.
Yeah, it's almost like it's all there's a cousinship.
Yes,
100%. So what has been your relationship to Miami? Were you born in Miami?
I wasn't born in Miami, but I moved to Doralzuela before it was Doralzuela in 1996 for my mom to take her job at El Nuevo Herald. Speaking of that generation of journalists, that was one of the golden ages, I think, of local journalism here. So I grew up in the midst of that city, welcoming Dominican families and Colombian families and Venezuelan families to now be the Doral that we see today. Went to John I. Smith Elementary for second grade, and then moved to Broward, and then moved back to go to college at the University of Miami. So then I moved again to DC and Costa Rica, and moved back one more time, Ana Sofia, right back to Doral. So my stint in South Florida has, yes, been shaped between Miami and Broward, but I found it so fascinating that when I moved back in 2015, it was to the first area I lived, to a much different Doral than in 1996. And since 2015, so almost 10 years since I moved back, I've been in Miami since.
And what do you think kept bringing you back to Miami?
Wanting to reverse the brain drain of our city, being at a moment where I had graduated from grad school, and my mom had recently passed away, and I was feeling that pull of wanting to be back con los míos. And my now husband, then fiance, we met in high school, and so not only were we both at a moment in our career where it's either we stay away from the city and build something that will be harder to leave behind later, or we move back now and build something here. But also his family and friends were here. And so community first and foremost, and wanting to establish a home base for real, for what in that moment was a decision for an eventual family. And now we have a daughter and a dog, and we're very much here to stay. So it was it was personal and professional, but not professional in the way where a job brought us back. We moved back without jobs. And we were just having faith that our city would welcome us back, and with a plethora of community from, in my case, college, high school, and family, and in my husband's case, community from high school and his family here that served as a great base to then make the community we have made as adults and build a life here.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that. And I feel like my own experience was growing up in Miami and then feeling that I had to leave to
pursue the career you wanted.
Pursue the career I wanted, the opportunities, because Miami did feel like a very young city. And I do feel, not that I understood it that way before, it just
Right,
felt
you
like,
maybe didn't have that language, but something felt like not ripe enough to get you where you wanted to be.
just growing up in that, just in the burbs and feeling like you wanted to experience a city and feeling like that was somewhere else. And I think what brought me back was that feeling that it was here as well, and that it wasn't even in a perfect way, but in a way that felt more mine than anywhere else I could be.
I love that.
And this was where I wanted to see if there was I could solve a problem in New York, or I can solve a problem here.
Yes.
And this was the one that meant more, because I was working through issues con los míos, with the people that I love, with the community that I valued, with the experience that I think is so special.
Yeah, where you felt at home. Same for me, Ana Sofia. Once all of the personal and long-term planning set in for me in 2015, then 2016 comes around. And what better year in that moment to begin what was my political, I don't even know if to say awakening, but the start really of my involvement. Where then I became you in that sense. I was like, oh wait, I'm here, we got married, we're settled, we got the job, we reconnected with our community. Now let's do the work, because I love this place and I want to stay. And the experience of being here in Florida during an electoral year that was historic, as 2016 was, it has a lot of PTSD, but it also gave me the purpose that you're talking about, where it's like, look, in whatever capacity I have, given the ebbs and flows of life, I'm committed to this place.
Yeah, look, and I think it's also, for me, it was kind of in a humbling way of if you want to make a change, you have to work towards that.
Yes.
Like anything else, you have to work towards it for it to be what you would want to see. But now that you've been Miami vetted,
I'm Miami vetted.
I'm going to ask you our message for Miami questions. This is our lightning round that we're asking everybody, because I do feel, part of the reason we wanted to have these conversations is because I just think I know so many incredible people who are doing really impactful work, and just to kind of understand what their own experience was, but then also have them be able to, kind of send their own message for Miami. We're also kind of, we've really made our message for Miami part of what's our kind of through line through all of this election.
Yes, I've written postcards with messages for Miami.
I do feel, it's so funny, because I do feel very strong about my beliefs and my values and my opinions, but when it comes to engaging, I become very not independent, not agnostic to a certain extent, because I do want everybody to feel heard. And
yeah, you do. She does. She does do that. I +1 to that. She is that way.
I know. It's
I love that about you, though.
Yeah. But so this is, I want you to, kind of lightning round your own message.
I'm ready.
I'm going to ask you some Miami-centric questions.
I'm ready.
We always like to start positive.
Okay.
So what is Miami doing right?
Ooh. We are attracting world-class events. I mean, just look at F1, look at the Latin Grammy 25th anniversary, which I just mentioned. It was just Billboard Latin Music Week. If you want to be Miami Swim Week, all of these are worlds that I'm not a part of every day. We have Art Basel coming up in December. To think of Miami as truly being a international culture sports hub, I think is really fun and fantastic. And World Cup is coming here. I think that's
Yeah.
that's true, right? It's coming here to Miami. It's going to be one of the cities. So I like that about our city, that we are seen as a place where if you're not having something happen here, you're really not in. If
Yeah.
you're trying to plan something, I said that really convolutedly, but
Yeah.
like we're a spot, and I think
There's
it
a
brings
relevance.
there's a relevance and a cultural relevance that I think is exciting.
Nice. This is probably something we talk about all the time, and not you and I specifically, but what is Miami doing wrong?
I knew we were gonna come to that part. Look, you all, a lot of the issues that I hope are top of mind for all of you all watching whenever you watch this is the mobility of our city. So transit.
Everyone says transit.
You know, we're not doing that right. We have such a far ways to go to take the climate crisis seriously. I know there are incredible initiatives, but it's late to the game. And I do think that we have a long ways to go to breaking the silos of all of the neighborhoods that we've a little bit touched on in this conversation. But if you're in the design district, you need to spend a Saturday in Miami Shores. If you live in Doral, you really should spend an afternoon in Miami Lakes. If you live in Miami Lakes, I would love to invite you to un cachito on Coral Way. You know, I think that's still is a long ways to go for people to branch out across Miami-Dade County and see the realities of our city and not stay in their suburb or in their area. So I would name those three things for now.
No, I think that's all great, and I do think that if the transit, it feels
would
like
help my third point so
almost
much more.
Everyone, it feels like a very kind of like specific, and it still comes up, and I think it speaks to the need for connection. And
Right.
I think we talk about the polarization, but people are wanting to connect more.
Right.
And it's through how they move through the city,
Right.
what part of the city they move through. I think it's something we have a longing for each other. If that makes anybody feel better about any
Right.
divisions they're seeing in this moment.
That's so true.
What is your most nostalgic Miami memory?
Oh my gosh. The first thing that came to mind was grabbing a café con leche and an arepa with my mom at Don Pan in Doral in the late 90s. There are still Don Pans in Doral, but with the enormous influx of Venezuelans to the city, there are so many more Venezuelan spots that now get more hype and are also delicious. But Don Pan was the OG spot for Venezuelans. El arepazo for different reasons, but being dropped off at school before my mom went to the radio and passing by Don Pan to just grab that arepa and coffee is something I'll hold dear.
It's lovely. If you were to leave Miami, what would you miss the most?
I'm not going anywhere. What I would miss the most is not having to speak English all day. I truly mean this, that in my neighborhood on Coral Way, I go to the dry cleaners in Spanish. I get my groceries in Spanish. I get breakfast on the weekends with my family in Spanish. I talk to my neighbors in Spanish. I get, anything I may need at Ross or Books and Books, which I go often. We speak English at Books and Books too. Shout out to Michael Kaplan. But that living my everyday life in Spanish first is something I so treasure. I don't walk into any establishment speaking English first, and I love that.
Yeah, we're like living our year abroad.
Exactly, but it's a life abroad.
It's a life abroad.
So why would I go
You're an
anywhere?
expat.
Not planning to go anywhere.
What do you miss that Miami used to have?
$10 lobster Tuesdays at the old Tobacco Road.
Okay.
That
I like how specific that was.
That was a tradition for my family. I don't know how long they did this, but I was like, 9 or 10 years old when it would be a thing to go to one of the most beloved Miami bars to get a good family meal. So
Nice.
if Tobacco Road new location is listening to us, bring back the specials.
We can do that.
We can do that.
They
And
can
foam
do
bake.
that.
We'll do a foam bake and lobster Tuesday.
That sounds like,
Pulso Miami Freedom Project co-sponsored.
you know, I like an event.
I know, that's on the record. If it
okay.
comes back, we'll do it.
Okay, follow our Instagram. We'll see if that happens. What would you want Miami to look like in 20 years?
Oh my goodness. I would love to see diverse income housing across every area of the city with well-connected public transport and clean water and public spaces where multi-generational families are gathering and thriving.
Okay, I love that vision. And I think it's what everybody would want. So
And
let's
it's what
figure
so
out how to
many
make it happen together.
Yes, Ana Sofia, and so many people are working on that. I mean, you all, Transit Alliance, Miami Waterkeeper, Homes for All, and so many other organizations. Like, this work has started, so I hope in 20 years that we're closer to that vision.
Love it. If Miami were a song, what would it be?
Oh my gosh. There's a new, I'm not going to sing for you all, but Chino, part of the Venezuelan duo Chino y Nacho, did a song about Miami where he's naming all the Latina characteristics. And I think it's literally called Miami. And so go look up Chino's Miami song because it's great. And if I find it, I'll play a little bit of it to see if I can give you all a taste.
All right. And then what is your message for Miami in this moment? Your virtual message.
Ay, Ana Sofia, as I look for Chino's song here, and it's actually Nacho, not Chino. I butchered it. The other half of the duo is Chino, of Chino y Nacho. It's actually called Miami from Nacho, so you all can look it up. My message for Miami, don't give up on this place. Don't give up on this place.
I love it. It's that simple.
It's that simple.
Staying in it.
Staying in it. Be in the arena, as Brene Brown says. Stay in the arena, and there's no better place to be working to improve.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for this, Liz. I love that message. I love speaking with you.
This is such a fun experience, like two old friends talking, which we are. So thank you for having me.
But I think there's always something new to learn. And I think you just have to have a chair and a microphone.
Nothing a chair and a microphone won't bring out of me, Ana Sofia. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Liz, for what you do and for what you represent. So
And to
thank
you.
you so much
Thank
for being
you.
here with me. And thank you all. Please follow us at Miami Freedom Project on Instagram, and then all of our handles are there. All roads go through Instagram, but then please connect with us. We have a lot of things going on. We're working on that phone bank, Tobacco Road.
Yes.
You heard
Tuesday
us.
Lobster night.
Tuesday Lobster
It'll happen.
Night. We can make it happen.
We'll make it happen.
All right, I'm going to work on it. All right, thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.